This is Chuck Ritzke, Problem Solving Enterprises. We decided to do start these series of more in-depth discussions with people I know. I mean, I'm an actuary by trade, life actuary mostly, but I purposely wanted to, I know a lot of experts in a lot of areas, and purposely wanted to get in depth and be able to ask questions, maybe dumb questions as we go to just get a feel for some of the higher level issues in the industry and what some of the experts I know think of those issues and what the impact is and what we can do about it. So today, our inaugural call is with Victor Castellanos. We've known each other for quite a while. We both served on the board of ICMG together, and Victor is the Vice President and Senior Client Manager of Medical Reinsurance Business Development with Swiss Re. So I thought it would start out, Victor, you've got a long background in a lot of different areas, a number of companies. If you could sort of fill us in on how you got to where you are now. I know people in insurance, there's not very many of us that when we were 10 years old decided, hey, I know I want to be in insurance, right? That doesn't generally happen. So it's always interesting to get a feel for how you got to where you are. So go ahead, let me know.
Well, first of all, thank you, Chuck, for thinking of me. And I'm assuming this is, you can hear me okay.
Yes.
So this is very exciting. I'm a huge proponent of trying to learn from the best. And, as you mentioned, we served on the board at the ICMG board for numerous years. We've known each other for a really long time. And I've always admired, your way of thinking. And I got to say, particularly for an actuary, you have quite a different perspective on things. You're much, much more entrepreneurial and creative and marketing focused. So always appreciated that. And so I'm glad to be here with you today. And those of you who are able to join us, I hope this is a useful of your time, and we can learn together. So thank you for that. As far as how I started my journey, well, it's a long one. I've been in the insurance business almost 40 years, so I have to really think about this and think about what really got me into the business. And I would say out of the gate, for sure, I did not intend to be in the reinsurance business. It really came to be from an internship that I had, believe it or not, at Swiss Re in the mid 80s. My sister worked at Swiss Re, and during the summer, she suggested that I apply for an internship, and so I did. I worked at Swiss Re during the summer, and I had a gentleman by the name of Gerald Levy that really took a liking for me and saw maybe a few things that I didn't realize and took me under the wing. And he basically said after the intern was completed, he looked me in the eye and says, "Young man, if we get a new open position, I want you to come back and work for us." And sure enough, he lived up to his word. He called me and they called me. And so I, in essence, came back in the following year and started my career at Swiss Re. And that was in 1986, Chuck. So a really long time.
Were you just out
And
of school?
I was sort of going in between school and doing a number of things. So it was what I grew up in New York City and Manhattan, an area that's called Washington Heights. There's a movie that was filmed in Washington Heights, titled Washington Heights. There was even a Broadway show. So we've got a few things out there to remind us of what the area looks like. So it was an interesting time.
So you were in New York City at the time, and you got an internship. Were they in Orlando at that time, or in Florida, or was it a New York off? I mean, how did you
Yeah,
get
great.
from New York to Florida? That's quite a change.
We'll have to fast forward on that one. But in essence, I was living in New York City, born and raised. Again, born and raised in New York City, and I did a lot. I was did numerous jobs in New York City, and so Swiss Re had an office in New York. Its main headquarters was in New York. Currently, we have our headquarters is in Armonk, New York. But in the 80s and 90s, the headquarters was, and the last office that I was in, I still remember it. It's 237 Park Avenue, and so that's where we had. It was an amazing office. Nice to be in the city during those years.
Great. Okay. Well, that's it's hard to believe 40 years. You must have started when you were 10, but
Oh, well, thank you. I owe you
uh,
a drink.
there you go. Yeah, the free ones at ICMT, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Um, so I'm going to jump into a topic, and we'll take us wherever it goes. If we get off on a side topic that seems to be interesting, that's fine too. Based on your perspective, obviously coming from the reinsurance business, you have perhaps a special or different perspective from that, and just all your 40 years of experience. And one of the things that I think about a lot, even though, again, I don't know anything about health insurance to speak of. I mean, my first job, I did a little bit of health insurance as a student, but they quickly moved me out of there into life insurance. So I don't really know that much, but I want to talk about the reputation of the health insurance industry and how it got that way. I mean, a lot of industries have quote, where the public probably negativity about it in terms of pharmaceutical companies charge too much for their drugs, and oil companies, right? There's the whole environmental issue, and that gas prices are a lot of money and cost people a lot of money. And health insurance also seems to have a negative implication. But I think one of the difficulties, and you could speak to this, is the complexity of health insurance, whether people really understand what we do, or what the in it's not we, I'm not doing anything, but what the industry does on the health insurance side, and how we've gotten to that. Now, certainly every industry has bad players and things that do things that are appropriate and deserve it, but it seems like in particular health insurance is totally to blame for the high cost of healthcare and the claims that don't get approved, and I think that may be a little bit unfair. How do you think we got to that point in healthcare and health insurance, and the role that the health insurers play?
Well, I don't know how much time we have for this podcast
Whatever you
here,
need, whatever you
but
need.
that it's a very complex ecosystem process, and quite frankly, it's also disturbing to see some of the backlashes that occur. Obviously, there's some challenges, and the problem with healthcare is that it combines money with emotions, with other things that people expect. Is this theory that I believe in? As long as you set the expectations and everyone lives up to those expectations, then everyone's happy. But you can't satisfy everyone 100% of the time, and there's so many moving parts in the healthcare industry. It's not just one part. It's very segregated, and not only is it segregated, but there's also so many different moving parts. It's like saying transportation. You have many modes of transportation. You have cars, trains, planes, railroads. And so when you sort of say, well, health insurance or even insurance, and you're a life insurance expert, you're a lifer, right? That's
Hmm.
even got a lot of
Yeah, we
different.
we have a share of pushback on things. Everybody hates annuities, even though just like that, just like health insurance, annuities are not one thing. There's like 15 different types of annuities, and they all do different things, and come from different perspectives. Yet somebody mentions annuities. Oh yeah, they're bad. They're ripping us off.
Totally, I've heard that said many times, where it's like, no, there's no way, I would recommend annuity and so forth. But clearly, there's a need for that. There's a place for that. So, I think back to the insurance, particularly our topic today on health insurance. Again, it's a very complex system. It involves a lot of moving parts, as you mentioned, pharmaceuticals, providers, hospitals, caregivers, insurance companies and reinsurance companies, agents, consumers. So there's a lot of moving parts. And I think again, the challenge is that it's hard to understand. It's a very complex system. And not only is it complex, but health insurance is probably one of those services, products, depending on how you look at it, that you really don't know what you're going to pay until you're done. Most of the products that you buy, whether it's again a car or a product or a service, you sort of understand, okay, well, what's this car going to cost me? And am I going to do the reviews? Can I test drive it before I buy it? And once I buy it, I sort of know what I'm going to get and what I'm going to pay and what my, maybe payments are going to be. Health insurance is kind of the total opposite of that. You just don't know. You pay your premiums and you sort of expect it to pay for claims, any kind of claims that you have, regardless of the claims, but you really don't know how much it's going to cost. And so that's a big challenge as consumers that we have. And I think it's just, again, I'm going to sort of say complex in so many ways. So we probably need to figure out a way to add some more transparency. So maybe there's a way to, if there's a particular service, a knee replacement, a hip replacement, or something that's a little bit more specific, maybe we should know how much it's going to cost before we do that. And so we understand what the cost is, and as opposed to sort of, okay, I need a knee replacement, and you don't know what your copays and deductibles and what the overall cost is. I think so. If we can address the complexity perspective, the transparency, by sort of showing some of these, I think we could do a lot better. There's obviously a lot of fraud involved, and what happens, unfortunately, with fraud is that insurance companies and providers need to find ways to protect themselves, and within that unintended consequence of trying to protect yourself, consumers are having to do extra things and get pre-approvals that maybe are not required or not necessary, but they really are to try to prevent.
All you have to do is talk to your doctor and get them talking about health insurance and claims and getting approval for this or that, and they'll give you an earful every time you talk to them about, I can't believe how much the hoops they make us jump through, and this is so obvious, and things of that nature.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably one of their worst jobs as a provider these days. I have the same conversation with my doctor that I've been going to for over 20 years, and he's getting to the point where it's really difficult. It's one of the more difficult parts, and so there's obviously some software and technology that industry has developed to help with that, but still, I think that applies for any physician, doctor, dentist. It's the type of hoops and work that they have to do to just get paid.
Yeah. You mentioned the emotional aspects of health insurance. Obviously, you hit people at a time when they're maybe going through something very difficult, if it's a serious health concern or whatever, and they have to jump through these hoops. And one of the things that I find disturbing that I feel like the industry needs to try to figure out how to do something about. Now, there are all kinds of kooks in the world that'll do goofy things. Like there was the guy who shot down the CEO of some health insurer. That's obviously a sicko guy, and that can happen in a lot of different industries. The thing that I find the most disturbing about that was in the aftermath of that, how many people celebrated that action. And that, I think, speaks to the emotional aspect of people just thinking about health carriers as being evil, as doing horrible things. And obviously the transparency thing, that there's a transparency thing, but as an industry, it's not like you and I are going to solve this on the call, but thinking about what kinds of things that the health industry can do to address that reputational aspect of it. Again, other industries have the same thing. The pharmaceuticals that charge thousands of dollars for a drug that everybody needs and stuff like that. But in health insurance, it just seems like it's particularly heightened that health insurers aren't doing the right thing.
You're absolutely right, and it's hard to fathom that folks are celebrating the murdering of a healthcare, United Healthcare CEO, and that it really comes to that. It's just mind-boggling, and there's when emotions are involved, things happen, and people do things that they probably wouldn't do under normal circumstances. And to your earlier point, that's exactly right. People, when they're dealing with healthcare issues, they're usually under emotional stress. They're challenged by not just life issues, but God forbid, it's a serious matter, chronic illness. There's a lot of emotion attached to that, and you feel like you should really get as much support as you can. And at the same time, insurance companies should be and are expected to be there during the when they're needed the most, when folks are vulnerable. So it's a really tough pull and push scenario where where's the right amount of care that you provide. So beyond the emotional aspect, which is very high. Again, if you look at we talk about products and so forth, even cars. There's a certain element of emotion, but never as much as it is for when someone, a loved one, or yourself are sick and ill and dealing with illnesses or having to go to the hospital and not knowing what to do or not getting the care that you feel you need or the medication that you feel you need. There's a lot of experiments going on, and some individuals want to have the experimental drugs, but the insurance company won't cover it because of the cost or the experimental aspect of it. So those are some of the things, and we can dive into some of those aspects. But I think the other part, Chuck, is, and you're perfect for this. I know you're a life actuary, but you're an actuary, very smart with numbers. You understand economics, finances, and there's a balance, right? You have to charge enough premiums and pay a certain amount of claims to be able to generate some sort of profit to be able to survive. Any business needs to make money. Otherwise, they'll go out of business and they go bankrupt, and then everyone loses. So there's that aspect of it as well. So how do you manage the balance between charging the right premiums, paying the appropriate claims, or denying certain claims, and trying to, there's a lot of fraud, which we talked about, and trying to prevent fraud, because everybody pays for fraud. Whether you use insurance or you don't, everyone's going to pay for the fraud, and that's pretty evident. As a matter of fact, you may have heard or seen some of the more recent Department of Justice uncovered a $14 billion fraud scheme on healthcare just within weeks of ago, and it's a serious matter. $14 billion scheme of defrauding the healthcare system, and you really can't charge for that type
Right.
of
But
scheme.
it's gotta come out somewhere, right?
It's
It's
got
gotta come out of
to.
something.
So yeah, where does it come from? And so
Yeah.
as an actuary, right, you have to sort of look at it and you say, well, how am I going to price for the claims and the severities and the frequencies and all these different things that we have to deal with in addition to fraud. And so it's a challenge. It's not an easy task by any means. And again, I keep saying it, and it's just very complex system, a lot of moving parts. And so, that I hope adds a little bit of clarity, or not clarity. This is
Yeah.
hard to clarify, but hopefully answers a little bit of your
Yeah.
question.
And it speaks to your initial talk discussion of the complexity. I mean, when you have a complex business, a complex financial business, it just right, it leads itself to fraud. I mean, the simple transactions are probably hard to do fraudulently, but when you have the complex thing with all the moving parts, for some bad players to get in there and do things that nobody's noticing because of the complexity, it just seems like that's 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 always going to be a difficulty. Um, yeah, what was one other thing I wanted to? Oh, you've touched on this a little bit, and one of the things that I think you see a lot of, like, there's discussions of, well, we should just get, why are there even health insurance companies at all? That, they shouldn't exist. And unless you're talking about the government taking over all of healthcare, which is some things that some people talk about, but a lot of people actually think, well, they're just sort of inserted into the process and they make money and they don't really serve a role. I don't think people understand what health insurance companies do in the delivery of health care. And could we do a better job of helping people understand that, um, if that makes sense?
It does, and I think we touched on a few of these, and we can certainly, you know, double click on some of these and speak more to that. Again, I would keep coming back to it's a complex system. I'm getting ready to celebrate 40 years in the industry, and Chuck, I'm still confused sometimes, and it's hard to fully understand what's covered, what's not. For example, on a personal level, my mother a few years ago got diagnosed with end-stage renal disease, which is a disease that's basically requires your kidneys failure and requires dialysis. So my mother's receiving dialysis 3 times a week, and not only is it difficult for her on mental state and her health, but just complex to sort of get to the systems, getting the approval, getting the dialysis center to come. Unfortunately, she needs transportation, so having to line up the transportation, making sure that they pick her up on time, get her to the dialysis center. But also, even before that, understanding how you apply for these types of things. It's a very, very, very difficult process. And so, again, when you're dealing with the emotions, the challenges, it just makes it really hard. But without insurance, she wouldn't be alive today.
Right, right.
So
And and understanding that role, it's not like we we don't. In some ways, we affect the cost of healthcare, right? Because you negotiate with providers and stuff for costs and stuff. But we're just really a financial. We just come up with the means to financially to pay for it. We don't really provide. We don't provide healthcare. We don't ultimately determine the cost directly of healthcare. We don't even determine the price. I don't think people necessarily understand, like you talk about the actuarial. I know from my few months in health insurance in the beginning of my career, we spent a lot of time talking, calculating loss ratios and stuff. To a certain extent, we don't even have that much control over the price, right? I mean, we have loss ratios which we meet, and if there's more claims, I mean, you talked about a balance. We have sort of two different uh, competing roles, right? You want to keep the cost of health insurance down, but you want to provide the claims that people pay for the claims that people expect. Well, those are competing issues, and the insurance industry often ends up being the sort of the bad guy that tries to balance those things. And again, I don't know that we uh, that people understand that that's what health insurance does. Um,
yeah, no,
so
I doubt the average person will truly understand how health insurance works behind the scenes. Clearly, it's a big industry. And I would say several things. It's kind of funny, but maybe not so funny after a while. But yeah, I'll be with my friends, and we'll have some dinner, some cocktail parties, and it's like, oh, Victor's the guy that makes our insurance premiums go up. He's the
yeah, right, right.
reinsurance guy, right? And so I was like, okay, it's between me competing against the tax collector, right? And sort of, and having to deal with that. I obviously we kid around about that, but the insurance business is a trust business. It's if you think about your early years or any time you look at how insurance was created, it's pooling risk and individuals. It's large numbers and having to take the mean average or having to look at loss ratios, as you said, based on a certain cohort or population. there's a lot that goes into just even the pricing, and then there's all the different components of paying for that. Very complex. As an actuary, again, you're the top mathematicians in the world, and there's less actuaries than there are doctors and lawyers by a far percentage. So it's a very difficult industry, but you serve an important role in insurance mostly, and even then, it's hard to get it right.
Yeah. And I think it's confusing to actuaries as well because this is probably an unfair question for you, but the thing that I get from my fellow health insurance actuaries when we talk about it, because I say, well, in life insurance we do this. Why can't you
Yeah,
do that? And of course, it's different. One of the main ways that life insurance is different is, generally speaking, there's only one claim for your
right.
lifetime, right? Right? As opposed to claims all throughout life. And one of the things that they tell me is, well, Chuck, what you're misunderstanding is that health insurance really isn't an insurance in a lot of ways. It's like a prepayment vehicle for things. And I guess, I don't know if you have any insights on what that might mean, or, I mean, I always took it as, yeah, things like, okay, you're going to go to the dentist twice a year. You're going to go to the doctor. If you pay for that stuff, it's a prepayment. You know it's going to happen. Whereas insurance is better for things that are large in effect, but low in terms of uh, frequency and prediction. And that's the stuff that works well in insurance. But in health insurance, there's lots of stuff, whether it's for political reasons or whatever, lots of stuff that gets added in that sort of clouds things. Does that make sense from your perspective?
It totally does, and that's a great sort of way to look at it. And it sounds like you've been getting those types of questions or discussions. And yeah, right. So to make it in the most simple form for life insurance, yeah, unless you're able to recreate and resurrect yourself, you only get one payment, and you sort of price.
Unless there's fraud, but sometimes there's fraud.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right. I
right.
think fraud doesn't choose which industry it's going to be involved with. So, but knowing the fraud piece of it, the life insurance, maybe again from a simple perspective, you have mortality tables and you have things that you sort of work on, right? And there's some of that, and there's some deviations. But for health insurance, there's so many moving parts. And you mentioned prepayment. I mean, there is some aspect of that because I think most people that pay into health insurance, they expect to get paid no matter what, right? They sort of expect their claim to be covered no matter what it is, what the condition. They expect it to. They don't really want to hear it's not covered. Um, and again, it sort of generates some negativity and maybe lack of trust because here I am paying my premiums. Why shouldn't I collect it? However, if you sort of bifurcate maybe the physical what's the word I'm looking for? The routines, like going to the doctor on an annual visit and getting mammograms for the female, all the things that you're supposed to do on a regular basis, and those are covered, and those are fine. Those are routine, maybe preventive types of things. That's fine. That seems to be okay, and I don't think there's a lot of issues with that. People can live with that, understand that. I think when it starts getting really complex is for the catastrophic, the larger types of claims that individuals have to deal with. And you have to sort of be mindful of that. There's some claims that we see on the reinsurance side. I mean, one of the nice things, um, good and bad, we see a lot of claims because our business is insuring the insurance companies or the risk takers, and we see a lot of the providers. So we have a very wide lens on the healthcare industry, so it allows us to sort of be more informed, have different aspects, viewpoints on that, but also gives us some insight as to the claims that are coming through, Chuck. I mean, a claim for $1 million these days is not a large claim. It's in the millions sometimes, and you ask yourself, "Wow, that's who can afford that?" I mean, fine if you're a multi-millionaire or billionaire, but even then, it's very, very expensive if you have that kind of care. So if we categorize that as more of the catastrophic care, and you look at these very large claims, I mean, 100,000, it's common. Sometimes if you look at your hospital bills and the hospital stays, you can go into a hospital for a few days and come out with a bill that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Who can afford that? So insurance covers that, maybe negotiates a better deal. And so it's playing a really critical role. There's a famous, or there's some in a stat, and you can correct me, fact check me later, but I believe it says that two-thirds of the people that go bankrupt are health care related.
I believe it. I believe it.
And that's incredible, right? Something's wrong. If you go into a healthcare illness and you have some sort of illness and the folks that go in bankruptcy, and you're saying two-thirds of those individuals are going bankrupt as a result, something's really wrong with the system, right? But again, it keeps people like my mom alive and many others. And hopefully you haven't had any serious illnesses, or and you look like you're staying very healthy, Chuck. So that's great. But you look around, you look at the obesity, and you look at people's health. There's a lot of challenges. So how much of that is really warranted to the extent that you just can't pay millions of dollars of claims and just expect everything to be paid and not have some sort of consequences associated with that. So it's a tough one to sort of solve. Maybe the word for today is that health insurance is complex. It's a complicated industry, and we just, I think, need to be more mindful and aware as a consumer, right? If you're a consumer and all of a sudden you're receiving a catheter, or you're getting some bills that you have no idea about, report it, talk about it, call your insurance company and find out what's going on, because that could be fraud, and then that helps the next person. Take better care of yourself if you can.
Yeah.
Accidents
Yeah.
happen, things happen. Not saying that, but there's a little bit of that goes on as well. As an industry, we're going through some challenges, and I know some of the GLP drugs that are coming out here recently with weight loss and some of the benefits associated with that, but they're expensive. That's an expensive way to go. And so who's going to bear the cost of that? Can
Yeah.
individuals afford that? The insurance companies
Yeah.
expected to pay the bill for that?
Yeah.
So there's so
And I
many
know what
different
they,
ways.
yeah, and I know what the actuaries talk about this, and um, there's a like with the weight loss drugs and other kind, regular checkups of XYZ, why don't you cover more of those and stuff like that. There's this idea that, yeah, those things can potentially save a life somewhere down the road, right? The weight loss drugs, people potentially lose weight, they don't have diabetes, they have, cardiovascular stuff, and ultimately that can avoid a claim. And so the thought seems to be sometimes that you do these things. Why wouldn't the insurance company just cover it? Because, well, it's going to save you money down the road. But just because it saves money down the road, it doesn't necessarily balance. It doesn't necessarily pay for itself uh, when you offer these benefits. And I think again, that's another area that we have to explain and understand. One of the things I wanted to uh, ask you about, I don't really review health insurance contracts. I don't even review my own health insurance contracts, to tell
Good
you
for
the
you.
truth. Uh,
See, there you go.
but
You're
I,
the average.
but
You're
I,
the average person.
yeah, but I do file life insurance policies and things like that. And as complicated as they are, I have a feeling that they're much simpler than health insurance. And you've mentioned that all the different kinds of things that you could cover and define. When you look at a health insurance contract, regardless of the type, and maybe one of the questions is whether we should be talking about these things with the various types of health insurance. Is it clear? Can you really write a contract that gets very specific that you could point to a consumer and say, this is what's covered, this is what's not covered, and it's very clear? Or is there a lot of judgment involved, which probably leads to some of the conflicts and difficulties? Having not read, I can't imagine that you can get that specific on, especially when there's new treatments coming out all the time. Is this kind of treatment should you cover it? I mean, is there a way of maybe educating consumers on how an insurance company decides whether something's covered or not, or will be covered in the future? As a side note, you said I'm young and healthy. You mentioned hip replacement, knee replacement. I just so happen to have one of each of those in the last
Okay.
6 months. And you're right. I was surprised. I mean, I didn't have to pay for it, but I was surprised how expensive it is. But I have a friend from Romania, and he talked about how if you tried to go get a hip replacement and a knee replacement in Romania, which has, national health insurance, they would laugh at you and tell you you're too old. You don't get it. So to a certain extent, I'm not familiar with all the entire world's healthcare and whether government healthcare is better than private healthcare or whatever. But it does sort of seem that we are, I don't want to say spoiled, but we have higher expectations than the rest of the world for our healthcare, even if it doesn't necessarily result in great health, because we all got to stop eating and not be so fat, and that would probably do more for us than all these treatments would. But um, is it when you read a health contract? I assume you have to every once in a while. Uh, is it clear what's covered, or is there just a lot underneath that has to be explained along the way?
Well, contracts have come a long way. I'm sure I can remember times when people would say, "Look, let's write this down on a napkin, and this is what we're going to agree to do," and things sort of work the way they're supposed to. But over time, things have evolved. People have misunderstood what's covered, what's not covered. So the contracts have gone, again, very complex. We cover this, we cover that, and then they have a list of what's covered, the definitions behind what's covered, and they have exclusions associated with the whole section on exclusions of what's not covered and when it's covered. So very complex. And when you look at it from a consumer perspective, again, the average consumer probably doesn't read their policy that they have. It's not something that they're going to put next to their night table and look at. So we probably could do a better job, Chuck. I mean, it certainly goes under the transparency or education, maybe the education piece. We could probably do a better job of educating consumers and policyholders on how insurance works and what it covers. But I don't know how many takers you would have on that, but it's a good thought. It's a great idea to sort of, educate folks. I mean, I think that is
And
an
I,
important part of it.
yeah, and I know it's complicated. I mean, just developing the underwriting page for an application, and you have to use all the specific, like all the different kinds of cancer, and it uses words that nobody understands, right? But you have to be that specific to say we cover this versus skin cancer, but we don't use the word skin cancer. We use all these. They have to use all these very precise terms, and I know the average person, like when they fill out the application, they don't know what they're answering yes or no to. Unless they actually have that. And even if they have that cancer, they don't realize they do because of the way it's described. And I'm sure that's like 100-fold of an issue on the health side.
It is. And I'm glad that, we can spend a few minutes just diving into that because you can see how quickly we can, have many layers of it. So you have the insurance company, they have their policy with the consumer, call it the original policy holder. Then you probably have an agent in between that. So you have an agent contract that you have to sort of look at. You have the regulatory issues, you got regulators, and depending on the type of insurance, Medicare supplement, which is something that I focus on, is a federal program, and the ACA programs and the Medicaid, those are state-based programs. Then you have employer stop loss, which some of us, have when our employer buys employer stop loss, and that's ERISA type of rules and regulations. So many, again, even regulations that not only do you have to protect yourself, but now you have to also make sure you're abiding by the rules and regulations and the compliance issues. And those change all the time. And they probably change a little bit behind the private industry. The regulators sort of look at things and say, well, this hasn't been working for the last X number of years. We need to change it, but it's probably
Hmm.
too late. So that you have that from our perspective as a professional reinsurance company. We're one of the largest reinsurance companies in the world. So here you have a very large organization, very complex, and we're probably speaking more about the U.S., but you mentioned your friend in Romania, and so I'm sure we have insurance policies and products in Romania as well. So Swiss Re as an organization, as an enterprise, has a lot of moving parts. They have to deal with so many different things, languages, what's covered, what's not, regulatory issues. Um, so again, to use a mathematical term, the compounding effect of that is pretty powerful. And sometimes in a difficult way, which makes it even more complex. But let's focus a little bit about the U.S., right? I think we are, in a sense, spoiled as to what we expect to get. And that can probably be for lots of things. We want everything yesterday.
Hmm.
Things that we order on Amazon sometimes show up on our door the same day, and we don't have to leave our house. And so what does that say? So it's just this constant, immediate um, gratification, if you will, of what we need. So health insurance, because of how it works, it has multiple contracts. So I think I diverted a little bit from your question on the contract piece, but it's just a lot of different layers. So even us, as I mentioned, a Swiss Re, we have a contract many times with the insurance company, what we cover, what we don't cover. One of the things that we do is we help insurance companies, quite frankly, in many ways. We help them with large claims. We help them with our actuaries. We have a large number of actuaries at the reinsurance that helps with making good decisions and looking at data. Um, and then there's lots of contracts. So over the years I've seen lots of contracts, and unfortunately I've had to participate in some arbitrations because there was a contract and the parties didn't agree on what the contract said. So you have to arbitrate, and you have to decide what was the intent or not. And so it's that piece of not just providing the services, but understanding what you're getting paid for, and then the services that you're paying. There's so many different types of contracts. So thankfully, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to speak to that. But I've seen my fair share.
Yeah, yeah. It's always exciting to have to read a contract. Uh,
Did I
yeah,
kind of hit on some of the
yeah,
contracting piece? I mean,
absolutely. I mean, it just further, like you said, we could have had this call in one sentence. Health insurance is very complex, and that just covers everything that we're talking about. So I think it's valuable to sort of go over some of this stuff in in the kind of detail we are to maybe allow people in the industry at least. I don't know, we'll be like the popular podcast where we've got 2 million people downloading our discussion here, but if we can get, you know, people in the industry to every once in a while take away from their day-to-day problems and activities and think about what we do and what some of the bigger issues are and how we can address them can be very important. And you talk about Swiss Re, and I think in general, uh, with reinsurance, you talked about you have all the data, and I know even on the life insurance side, if I have an assignment, I'm an independent actuary. The very first discussion I have with a client is who's your reinsurer, and I got to talk to them
yeah,
because
yeah,
I can't make up assumptions. I can't make up a lot of that stuff. The the reinsurers have the data and become the key factor in addressing any of the issues we have to address, whether it's product development or reserves or claim payments. So, um, do you see like that? Does Swiss Re get involved in some of the consumer-facing education or issues in using data and making not making data available. And that's, you send databases to to consumers,
Yeah.
but to be able to state something and have numbers behind it, which are become less refutable because of the data behind it. Do you see a role for the insurance companies to try to address some of these? Because I think you're right. I think it's complex, but doing things like transparency and education can really help address some of these issues. And it seems like reinsurers are particularly positioned to be able to do help with that. Am I wrong? Is that?
No, no. Well, first of all, I'd say I wish more actuaries thought like you and contacted us early on to discuss, because I think we have a lot of value to add. I think there's a lot of information. We have knowledge, experience, and again, we see it from so many different viewpoints, right? We run many insurance companies virtue from our contract. We look at what other companies are doing. We see the claims, we pay the claims. So we see a lot more than just, let's say, one insurance company, and they could be very large, which we have clients that are very large to very small, and so some could benefit from that. So I think your perspective, or sort of approach in talking with the reinsurance companies when you're developing a product is it's really great, because you're going to get a lot of information that you probably wouldn't normally, and much quicker and more efficient. So that's, again, another good strategy from your perspective. I think that maybe there's three pillars there. There's the education piece, transparency, and simplicity is three things that I would hope we can try to address, because it's complex. And maybe the title, Chuck, of our session here today might be, when you say, what do you think about health insurance, Victor? And I says, it's complicated, Chuck.
Yeah, I think
it's complicated.
That's a three description, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
So yeah, it's complicated. However, like anything else, we send men and women to the moon, and we do a lot of things that are complicated. So just trying to simplify that process, I think, would be important. I think the healthcare here in the U.S. compared to other countries like Canada that you hear a lot about, it's interesting, right? They have a social system, healthcare system there. But yeah, I think I hear the same thing. Not only is it, you're not going to get that knee replacement or a hip replacement based on age, but sometimes if you do, you have to wait many, 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 many months, sometimes years. And there's individuals that decide to come to the U.S. to get that. On the other flip side of that, drug pricing seems to be a lot more economical in Canada than it is in the U.S. There's lots of people that either find a way to go to Canada or find a way to buy their prescription drugs from Canada. Thankfully for there's the prescription drug benefit program that came out with the Medicare Part D has helped. That helped with some of the cost of drugs. But back in the day, I remember many, many times where individuals would basically have to drive to Canada to buy their drugs, because that was an inexpensive way of buying it. So nothing's perfect. There's a give and take.
And that's like the pharmaceutical stuff is like a whole nother series of discussions we could have on that, because it's, again, a confusing issue, and me not really understanding a lot of it. I said, why does this happen? Why did we do that? Why did we do this? Why is it so much cheaper in Canada and Europe? Is it because we're paying for the R&D and they're not, and the pharmaceutical company can, they're going to charge whatever they can charge, whatever people are able and willing to pay. Our healthcare coverage is so good, we'll pay more, right?
Right.
And if they want to sell something in these other countries, the price has to come down. It seems unfair to the American consumer, but there's a whole other balance issue I mean, R&D and in pharmaceuticals, I don't like to treat any of the industries like they're evil, right?
Yes.
They have issues too. The R&D is very important, and they spend billions of dollars to invent new drugs. And somehow, I feel like our system is flawed, but somehow they need to be paid for that. But we shouldn't have to pay $30,000 for some drug just because it's still under a patents or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's just another issue that just becomes, which we can leave that for another time because I think it's too much to get into for this.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
for sure. For sure. I would say one thing, I mean, it kind of triggered a thought on the insurance and how much we cover and so forth. I mentioned earlier how some of these, $1 million claim is not a surprise these days, but it's interesting because I can't recall at the moment the timeline, but there was a point in time where basically the medical limit on a claim was $1 million, Chuck, on the health insurance. This is we're going to cover from the insurance company. We'll cover these services, these costs up to $1 million. It was sort of there was a cap, call it. Well, they basically got rid of the cap to sort of allow for more flexibility. And what do you think has happened? Now the claims have completely shot up.
yeah,
The claims are in the multi-million dollars. And so there's a little bit of that because the insurance is willing to pay for it. Then they charge that money. So all of a sudden you have this unintended consequence of having much higher claims associated with that. And that also goes, by the way, with drugs. And we won't get in there because that's also complicated.
yeah. I
So
remember hearing some story. I don't know if it's true or not, when ACA was being implemented, and they were trying to get carriers into each state, to be competitive and all this stuff. That there was one state, I want to say that I heard it was Minnesota, but I'm not sure what state it was, that there was one person who had a $17 million claim, that didn't have the claim yet because he didn't have the insurance, but they knew it was going to cost like $17 million. And they couldn't get carriers in there because the first carrier in there would have to pay that $17 million claim because of the guaranteed insurability issues of it. And it's like, how do you address those kinds of things? It's just, with those costs going up. And again, I don't know if it was actually happened or was a true story, but yeah, you heard stuff like that, and it always makes you sit back and say, okay, that's a problem. How does that get addressed? It's
yeah.
hard.
How do we solve that? That's exactly right. And I wouldn't be surprised, in today's environment, Chuck, that there's a $17 million claim out there that is being either adjudicated, paid, um, or something to that effect, because that is the reality that we're dealing with. So if you think about that, it's hard to price for it. As an
Hmm.
actuary, how do you price for when maybe the average premium is for a family, it could be, I would say, for traditional health insurance. It's hard for me to kind of look at that since I have a good insurance through Swiss Re, but it's probably $10,000, $15,000 a year, let's say, something
Yeah,
for a family for a nice health insurance coverage, and maybe it's less. We have ACA, which helps, has a lot of subsidies, but I don't know, maybe pick $10,000. So you can imagine, how do you make up a $17 million claim when the average premium potentially is $10,000 a year? You
yeah,
just can't.
yeah.
So
It's
I think most consumers just don't understand that, and I think as a normal, individual and hopefully responsible human beings, once you start understanding the complexity of it and what goes into that, maybe there's a little bit more understanding and appreciation for what goes on in the insurance industry.
yeah. Well, hopefully the industry can make progress because we know it's essential. Health insurance is essential, and there may be alternatives, but it's not clear that the alternatives are better.
No, no,
And
it's not. It's hard to say.
yeah. So I think we probably solved any health insurance problems on this call. So we're all set with that. We could, next time we could move on to the Middle East and Ukraine Russian war and climate change and things like that because we've knocked this one off, I think. Uh, but is there anything in before we close that we haven't talked about in this area that you wanted to bring up or you think we should bring up? That
Yeah, I mean, I would just kind of maybe close with insurance is necessary. It's a necessary part of our life. It keeps a lot of us alive, and it's there for when you need it most of the time. And I think that it's a complicated system because there's so many individuals involved. It's emotional type of purchase, but all not purchase, but use. And again, most people think that they sort of are paying into a system, particularly a health insurance system that is prepaid. I pay, so I should get paid, and that's not necessarily how it was intended to work. It's particularly during this type of environment that we're in, where we have very large claims, a lot of experimental drugs and procedures. So there's a lot of challenges associated with that. And I think maybe the other thing is, and I don't know that any regulator would listen to this or they care, but there's some unintended consequences on some of these issues sometimes, where they make a law to protect a consumer, but in fact it ends up hurting the overall industry, and which in turn hurts the consumer. We're seeing that quite a bit on our Medicare supplement. There's a lot of states that are starting to go into GI, guaranteed issue, and the product wasn't designed that way. So as again, as an actuary, Chuck, right, you design products and you design and knowing certain things, you make certain assumptions. If you design the product and you sell it and something changes that wasn't anticipated, it's going to have an impact. And so
yeah,
I think that from that perspective, even the regulators need to be better educated and understand, and not just think that because they make a product like Medicare supplement guaranteed issue, that all of a sudden it's going to solve all the consumer problems. Quite frankly, it's doing the reverse impact.
yeah,
It's hurting the consumer in the end. So
yeah.
let's just all be a little bit more aware, knowledgeable, and understand that health insurance is needed. It's an important part of our lives, and it's hopefully there when you need it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that because I am on a committee on the American Academy of Actuaries. I think it's got a new name now, but it was originally called the Government Mandates Committee. And the whole purpose of that was look at all the state insurance departments, all the that would come up with a requirement that you have to cover this, or you have to make this guaranteed issue, or you have to do that, to try to explain to regulators, you can do that, you're in charge, but what are the unintended consequences of having all those mandates and having all those? It's a challenge to convince regulators because a lot of the regulators are politicians, and
Yes.
you know, and politicians like to give away stuff.
They do. They do. What are their constituents interested in, and what's the latest, trend and flavor? And it's hard to do it that way. And so, yeah, insurance. That's the other thing. I think you mentioned. I think we're wrapping it up, and so I won't get into it too much. But you mentioned something to the effect where we price things in a certain way, and then things change. So how do we adjust to that? And it's not just the premiums; it's just being more aware of where we're going on that. There's a lot of thoughts that I have, but I think here we are, just about an hour, so I'm not sure that we can continue to go much longer without having folks not be part of this. But I hope you've been able to enjoy this as much as I
Yeah,
have, Chuck. And so
that's good.
I want to congratulate you and acknowledge you for all the work that you've done. And again, as an actuary who's very creative in what you do, you think outside the box. We always have in all of our conversations. So keep it up.
Yeah, well, thanks, thanks. As you know, it's my son that talked me into doing this. I'm an actuary. I would never, you know, be this extroverted in terms of doing this. But I think I think it's good, and I think it's really helpful and valuable to get the perspectives of other professionals and other people with different expertise. I think the days of the actuaries in the back room with the eye shades doing numbers and slipping them under the door are, is gone, and we really need to talk to each other about this stuff. So
Yeah, well, I commend you
So,
for that and taking the courage to do that. And I myself am, yeah, I love podcasts. I listen to many different podcasts, and I'm always intrigued by learning from others that know more, and particularly, when it comes to what I've been doing in the last almost
yeah,
40 years, health
yeah.
insurance. So I'm learning every day, Chuck. So this
Well,
has been helpful.
as you go through stuff and you think you think of something that would be a good topic, whether you'd want to participate in it or even recommend somebody else to do, feel free to let me know, and we could hopefully it's not going to be a series until I do more than one, so we have to have to get this moving. So I really appreciate, Victor, you taking the time and taking the risk of being our guinea pig on the first uh, version of this. I guess I don't know if this is officially a podcast or not. I'm, I call it that because that's what they seem like, but maybe there's another name for these. I'm not. I'm not that. I'm technically oriented, but not when it comes to like social media stuff.
Well, that's what you have your son to help you with, and others. Again, looking at people that are better and smarter than us is always a key part of it. It's a good leader skill set to look to others that are smarter and better than you are in certain aspects of it. But yeah, I think we should call it the first in podcast. Chuck Ritzke and Victor Castellanos. Throwing some ideas around and
Yeah,
talking about a very complex system, the
yeah,
health insurance.
yeah. I was thinking with the whole introversion thing, like we could call it an actuary talks to other people.
There you go. I like it. I like it. I
Okay.
like it. So, well, good. Well,
Well,
Chuck,
thanks again. Thanks again. I think we probably beat this to death at this point. We could do more maybe on some other date, and hopefully we meet in person, maybe at an ICMG meeting. I don't know if it's that's the last time we've met in person. I don't remember if it was the last one or two times ago. But if you get a chance to go, at least if it's in Florida.
I know I need to make that part of my schedule. It's a great organization. ICMG is probably in my mind my favorite type of industry because it's small enough but big enough to meet new individuals and see the folks there. So yeah, and you've done a great job. The board has really taken it to the next level, and
Yeah,
which
and
I really
we would probably be having this call now, not only probably because I wouldn't have interacted with you without the ICMG, but also it's caused me to say, I got to talk to other people. I really need to understand all aspects and not just, I don't go to very many actuarial meetings anymore because I go to mostly ICMG meetings.
yeah.
So, so again, thanks. And I appreciate it. And I guess it's not the weekend yet, but it's getting close enough that I can wish you a good weekend.
Well, thank you, Chuck, and I appreciate you, and again recognize you for being courageous and bold and extroverted.
There you go.
Take care.
Okay, we'll see you. Thanks.
All right, bye.